bar and sky over here.
Okay, everybody, if I can get your attention. Hello and good evening. Hello. We're going to bring this meeting to order, and let's see. I'm not sure if we have enough room at the table, but if you want to bring people up to the table to participate. So if you are in this seating back here and would like to join us at the table to contribute, you're more than welcome to do that. Because this is really just a session to listen, and that way you can see things better. And then we'll go around the table and introduce ourselves.
I'm going to sit next to that.
I don't see. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use the microphone, and we'll pass it around. And I think I'll pass the microphone to the left. I am Liz Adams. I'm with CRL Associates, and I am staff for the Systems Advisory Committee. Maria apologizes that she cannot be here tonight. It is her wedding anniversary, and she's celebrating with her husband and family. Terrence had said he was going to be here. We might see him come in late, but we wanted to get started. So I'll pass the microphone around, and we'll get everybody introduced.
Drew Dutcher at Larry and Swansea Neighborhood Association.
And Betty Grimm, Swansea area, thanks.
My name is John Mayhem Martinez, not Mayhem. Goville.
I'm David Allison with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
Jim Garcia with Clinica Tepeyac.
Ann Elizabeth, Gloville.
Vicky Zeppelin and Rhino and Groville.
Dave Oletsky, Glowville.
Been on for 4 years now.
Michael Long with Riverside Cemetery.
Eric Anderson with National Western Center. I'm the design manager.
Jay Rankins with MIG, placemaking study.
Gretchen Holler with the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center.
Mark Rodman, History Colorado. Paul Engel with Amoresco.
Mackenzie Taylor with MIG. Angela Smith with MIG.
Cheney Bostic on the placemaking study.
I'm Sean Snow. I'm the Historic and Cultural Resources Manager for the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center.
Mike, keep the time, big black duck.
Dorothy Berlin, citizen.
Bob Binder with ELR Group Architects.
Maxine Chicago.
Okay. At this point, my job is to maybe pass microphones around, but turn it over to Eric Anderson. And
This microphone is
it feedback? Okay.
All right. First of all, thank you all for coming out on Monday night to have us walk through this document and get your comments on it. We're going to talk about two things tonight. One is the campus cultural plan, and then the other one is the public space programming plan. Both of those I believe you have received. We'll have them up on the screen here too. They're both rather lengthy, but they're pretty important documents as we move forward. So Jay's going to go through both of these, but I just want to start. The campus cultural plan is really a resource document for future designers, okay? It's intended to give a brief history, identify all the cultural resources that we know of, talk about public art, and then list all the references in the history of the site so that when a future designer or an artist or whatever comes to the site, they can look at this to start to get inspiration, and then also look at some of the references to get much more information about the site. Okay, so it's not intended to be exhaustive in everything that's there. We're trying to identify as many connections as possible. But tonight we want to get your comments on that so that we can kind of wrap this piece up and move forward. Okay. The second piece that we're going to talk about is the public space programming document. And this is a document that talks about all the public spaces on the campus and what uses might be able to go there and how those spaces may be used. This has a long way to go to actually hone all this down for what we end up putting on the campus, but it's the starting point for those documents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and he's going to give just a brief update on the cultural plan, and then we'll go into it in detail with you guys. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Eric. So the presentation that I'm going to give is actually what we shared at the CAC meeting last month, so I'll do it really quickly. The idea is to just give you a reminder of what's in the document, the organization of the document, and then we have the digital version that we can pull up on the screen and start to discuss specific comments. And our thought was that we could just go major section by major section, and if you haven't reviewed the document, hopefully there's a conversation that you can sort of respond to and chime in on. But ideally you have specific comments and thoughts, and we have our team members here that contributed to the document as well to answer some of those questions. So, and I know that we have until 7:30, and we're going to try to be respectful of everyone's time, especially because this is an additional meeting on top of our normally regularly scheduled meeting. So the cultural plan, as Eric said, the idea is to identify those key defining elements and influences of the West, define the campus as a cultural institution, and yeah, really to sort of catalog all of these different historic resources, which some are physical, of course, but some are about the stories, about the history of the place, about the history of the neighborhood. So it's not an exhaustive list. It's not meant to, it's not, we didn't set out to create a 5,000-page document, which maybe that wouldn't even be enough to really document every aspect of the site over time, but it's to provide that high-level overview, have the resources, that, as Eric pointed out, so that you could investigate if a certain aspect of the campus interested you, or the cultural past, that you could investigate that, and then again inspire the design of a building, the design of a plaza, an event that you'd like to host on the campus, or public art. This is the draft that you all received. So it's the cultural, or the campus cultural plan. And as we pointed out, the cultural plan is to define the art and heritage, how it plays a role, that it's a resource and tool for artists, designers, storytellers, planners, and consultants, and really to create this flexible thematic framework. And I think that's an important point. We, as part of the master planning effort, and you all contributed to this, the desire was to create a campus that didn't focus solely on one event, didn't focus solely on one aspect of the culture of this place, one people. So it really does have to be flexible and accommodate a lot of different aspects. So we tried to be pretty comprehensive in documenting that. If there's anything that we missed, we'd love to hear that this evening too. So if there's something that's not in the document that you're seeing, we'd invite those comments for sure. But ultimately, it's to create then guidance for what happens on the campus, both in terms of the physical form as well as the programming. The components are this vision for the cultural resources at National Western Center, history of the site, reflecting history at National Western Center in the future. So that's basically how might we use some of those historic assets, how do we tell some of those stories that may not have a physical manifestation. What is the future of the National Western Center as far as some of the additional programming that doesn't exist currently on the site, opportunities for neighborhood residents, public arts master plan. There will be a much more detailed document on the public arts component. So there's the nitty-gritty of how do you cite the particular art piece, how is that funded, how is it procured, how is an artist selected. So those will be documented separately, but there's an overview section in the campus cultural plan, and then implementation. So we all know the vision statement, but to be the global destination for agricultural heritage and innovation. And in the document, we talk about this concept of curation, or a common thread, and that's largely trying to create that flexible framework to encapsulate all the different aspects of what the campus could be. So aiding and attracting the appropriate partners and programmers, defining direction for the interpretive messages, looking at helping to create the character of the site. We talked about the history of the site at the last CAC meeting, and we looked, if you remember, there are these maps that showed what the footprint of different buildings were on the campus, different uses. So we had a map here showing circa 1900, moving forward to 1930. You can see a pretty dramatic change there, expansion of the campus. A lot of the industrial uses had developed at that point along the riverfront. Here we see the jump across, and I think John had pointed out at the last meeting, if you look at this diagram, actually the last three, but sort of this expansion this way, eating into the neighborhood eastward. So this is all the way back to 1900, here's 1930. This next one is a little more dramatic, 1960, where the larger venues are coming in. And obviously today, even much more dramatic, 2017. Most of that historic neighborhood fabric is taken up with the existing campus. These character areas, this is a pretty major component because if you remember the overall scope of the placemaking study, a major piece that is yet to come is the development of the design guidelines for the campus. And those are being organized around these character areas. The idea of character areas was embedded into the campus master plan. It was a really important piece of that. And thinking about how all the different pieces of the campus come together and function as a larger campus whole, but have individual identity, character. That could be in the architecture, it could be in the plantings, the signage, the materials on the ground, all these different aspects. So as we updated the site plan over the course of the winter, these character areas evolved. And probably the most recent change to that would be that we actually called out a character area along Betty Cram Drive here. In the previous versions, character area 6, or the equivalent of that, basically extended to Betty Cram. Character area 8 extended up to Betty Cram, and this almost became a dividing line rather than a unifier. And I think everyone can agree with the adjusted site plan that Betty Cram really is this kind of community, neighborhood, industry, education unifier, and so we wanted the character areas to reflect that as well. And then similarly, when we get on the east side of the NSF, previously character area 4 extended down right to Betty Cram Drive, and then character 5 to that, and we adjusted character area 5 sort of north and eastward so that we could really focus on a double loaded corridor and creating a sense of place along Betty Cram. For each of those in the document, and we can go to the specific pages if we need to or want to, but we have character areas delineated in there. At this phase in the cultural plan, it's really articulating what happened in those geographies and what are the either previous or existing historic assets that still remain. And we have access to perhaps if they're maybe the boneyard or if it's something that's being deconstructed or they're still standing. Moving forward in task order 3, when we're doing the public realm design or concept design, as well as thinking about the future character of the buildings and sort of the articulation of those, the materials, we're really setting the course for the future of these character areas. So it was a little complicated that we're introducing the character areas here and sort of cataloging the historic assets, but not necessarily setting the future direction yet. But that's what the cultural plan does. Task order 3, we're actually charting the future direction for those character areas, integrating the historic assets. Within each of those character areas, then, we have a variety of different interpretive opportunities. So if you remember, type 1, so those are all the little blue clusters on your document if you have it printed out or up on the screen here. Those are clusters of historic resources. So those are things that occurred together, they have similar meaning or purpose, and they still are in physical proximity to each other and exist on the campus. Type 2 are the individual resources, so those standalone. Type 3, the reuse of historic materials. And then type 4 are interpretive marker opportunities, where maybe an event occurred, a historic structure might have existed at one point, but no longer, that historic asset no longer exists. And then the last piece of the little overview presentation, it's a pretty interesting piece of the document. It's basically providing ideas for art, for signage, for buildings, and for the public realm design as far as the integration of historic assets. So it pulls from examples from Denver, from around the country, and even internationally to show how some of these different resources might be used. And so looking at the yards, obviously a huge opportunity with all the material that's there. Those are, other than the bison pens, are going to be temporary moving forward. And so there's the lumber, there's the different aspects of the horizontal plane. There's the different features that we have with the latches and the hinges and all of these different hooks and whatnot that we integrate into the future design. Here are some examples from some other places. The rail history is an important component. Yeah.
I just have a real quick comment. On the bison pens, are those going to be closer? I mean, obviously they have to be permanent because you're continuing the wild animal there.
Yep.
So I'm imagining or assuming that you're going to have some type of a structure that's more permanent that can maintain those animals. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the bison pen location will actually be right next to the Rock Island Railroad relocation here. And so this piece of the yards will be basically permanent pens, and the rest will be these movable rock bottom pens that have a concrete base and then basically railings that fit into those.
So is there going to be, I had bison before, and that's the only reason I'm asking these questions. From my experience, it's nice to have some black curtains so the animals can get inside the column as much as possible.
Yeah, so those will be equipped with the ability to put the curtains down.
Or the panels or whatever.
Yeah, the panels.
So they'd be able to manage and put so much stress on the animal. And oftentimes what happens is these animals get sick from all the stress and from going through these pens.
Yeah, we're working closely with the stock shows, livestock folks about the bison and what all they need. They have the chute right now that they unload on. We're going to move that and make that a permanent piece also.
Yeah, they'll have their own loading
We're trying
dock.
to deal with all of those things. And then they're trying to figure out how then from the pens, how do you move them to the show ring or the auction ring? And then how do you move them back safely because you can't alter those.
No, you can't.
They just run.
Yeah, so that's part of the location there too. So there's the auction arena as part of the Stockyards Event Center, which is right here. And so those permanent pens would be right here. So the physical adjacency is there, and then they would have their own loading dock area right here as well.
Cool.
So question, Jay, the permanent pens, are you going to try to reuse the old?
Where we can.
Okay, good.
It's a
Okay,
matter of
yeah.
how, I think there may be, we'll probably have to, there's tons of metal fence panels out there that we can probably reuse for that, for some of it. And actually, what Kai has told us is that the pens that the Buffalo are in now are the newest pens that they have built on the site. So hopefully we can reuse as much of that as we
That
can.
would be cool.
Yep.
Okay, and then we're almost done with this piece, and then we'll open it up to comments, questions about the. No, you're great. No. And yeah, interrupt me as much as you'd like. I just wanted you to know that there's just a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up. So these are some examples specifically with rail. And how rail is actually integrated into the site. So obviously a really important component. As we're consolidating the rail and moving it, or consolidating everything next to the BNSF rail, we're thinking about in that sort of main plaza space, are there opportunities to still suggest that the rail was here? And so sometimes that's done quite literally with embedding the rail into the paved surface there. But there may be other ways to achieve that, and so we'll be exploring them, looking at other precedents. Also looking at the water tower and integration of the water tower. There was actually an exchange today about that's still floating a little bit as far as the location. And regardless, it'll end up in this general location, which achieves one of those clusters that we were talking about, which would have the adjacency to the Armor Admin building here. It's just a matter of making sure that it just has to move once is the important piece of that. Because there's existing road, existing rail, and we don't want to move it multiple times. And so we're examining where that exact location is. But again, the physical adjacency to the Armor Admin building with the Armor water tower is important. Thinking about integration of the historic penning, which could be used as fencing, it could be used in wall material, it could be used in the ground plane potentially. You can think about lighting fixtures. And then here's some other examples of historic reuse at different elements. And we were looking at some examples today of the Pearl Brewery, and there's a lot of images actually in the cultural plan. It's in San Antonio, Texas. And what was really interesting, and we were discussing earlier today actually in one of our design meetings, was the adaptive reuse of a lot of these historic materials. And so some of the larger bats that they used actually became outdoor planters. and incorporation of some of the materials to create shade structure. And that might have actually been on the interior of a building or on the ground plane. And then finally here, thinking about those bridges. So we're thinking about the catwalks, or the reuse of some of those materials, or at least the sort of the form. The sheet bridge, we talked about at the last CAC meeting being a huge asset. So the structural analysis being completed on that. And we're thinking about how that might be able to reuse or retain its existing location or reuse somewhere else on the site. But those become really important elements. The pedestrian bridge, could we integrate elements there, or on the 51st Street Bridge, or on the Betty Cram Drive Bridge? These become iconic structures and opportunities to potentially reuse some of these historic materials. So this was just the timing and process, updated just with showing the tonight on there. So we distributed this draft to the CAC for review. We have this work session this evening, and our hope is to refine that and basically finalize the cultural plan here in the coming weeks. Then those obviously have implications for the work moving forward, not just for the placemaking study, but also for all the rest of the design teams, the artists that Eric was talking about, as we move forward with implementation. So we have a similar overview presentation for the public space programming, but we wanted to pause and take comments, suggestions, questions, if there's omissions that you want to point out. We have people taking notes, as well as resources that hopefully answer some questions, or at the very least, we'll take down the questions and thoughts and get back to you all. So, Liz, do you want to sort of, I don't know, go in order of whoever has
I will.
thoughts?
Questions?
And I can bring up the document as well.
There goes Drew.
Oh, I'll just say real quick. So there's a really rich supply of just historic remnants and materials and stuff, and I hope that, I think integrating that into it is really, adds a lot of richness to it. So I hope we won't be too worried about money. I mean, like in the sense like, well, we can't do it because we don't have enough money for something like that. Hopefully, if there's things we can do to find a way to do what we want to do, work on that. Like kind of what we did, Gretchen, with 4701 Brighton, and not.
Yeah, and that's an example of a pretty expensive
well,
way
maybe that's not
to integrate or retain, right? But a lot of times it's actually more cost effective to reuse some of these materials because we're trying to create character, we're trying to create these unique features, and doing that from scratch, brand new, can oftentimes cost more. So I think it's a great point, Drew. And if you remember, Eric talked, I think, or maybe Sean did actually, at the last meeting about the inventories that are occurring. So we're cataloging all these elements, so during the demo or deconstruction in most cases, that those can be retained and saved, and we know what resources are available for integration into future design of buildings and public realm.
Did they ever find a place to find a spot to put the old hotel in there on 4701, 47?
You want to respond to that?
Yeah, we think so. We have been talking that we want to put it back as close to its original location as it was, okay? And so it was right here at the corner, and the street gets widened 40 or 50 feet, the right of way. So we're hoping that it can go right back on that corner, just set back. We don't know for sure yet. We still have lots of studies to do, but...
Gretchen says we
would you? Okay, then I'll let Gretchen.
We have a pretty public commitment that we're reserving that location with our partners, that's where we would hold it's pretty valuable real estate at that point, but that is intended for the reconstruction of that building and the use of the palletized bricks, at which point landmark preservation would consider then landmarking that reconstructed building. And that's an essential component of what we did. It's not just that we did this demo where we palletized and saved the bricks. It's that it would be rebuilt at that location. And so we are holding that, and we pretty publicly stated that in our letter before we proceeded with the building. So.
That's it.
Now, what about that building Paul was talking about that had to be moved?
Gretchen,
Do you want to talk?
Betty had a follow-up question.
Hold on, Betty has a follow-up. Yeah, Betty, hang on.
Then we'll come back to you, Dave.
Yes, Betty, go ahead.
Just wondered how big they're going to make it.
How big?
It can't be that big.
How big the building?
Yes.
It'll be reconstructed.
Eric knows this better than I do, but we did imaging of the building before. We took the bricks off. So we have 1,000 points of it was laser imaged so that we can reconstruct it using the door frames and the window frames and those other components that were kept. So all those are being stored in an indoor location so that they're protected from the elements. But it's meant to, it would look exactly the same in the reconstruction. And there were multiple layers of bricks as you went through. I don't know if you saw the process happening, so that there were plenty of bricks to be able to do this exterior on a new building. But what we need to find is the building partner that wants to come in and construct the new building. At that point, we've got land and bricks. And really, it's an important place to hold because that's the entrance to between the campus and the community, and it had historic uses. So that's why I really jumped all over that's the site. Yeah.
Great question, thanks, Ben. Dave, so you asked about another building?
Building Paul said needed to be moved.
Should I just give this back to you?
I don't want to take the microphone away from Eric and Sean because we talk about Hay Barn number 3, I think is the building, and I was absent from the last meeting. I was back home in Ohio in the other area. But I think, I didn't bring any chocolate back. No, my kids were complaining about the humidity the whole time is what happened on that visit. So we're talking a lot about Hay Barn number 3. In Paul's point of view, he spent some time, Mark and I and Sean met with him to understand the point of view from the stock show and their livestock operations, which they've got some real concerns about it in its current location. If you think about what happens to the livestock show and that it's the last one like this in North America, and a lot of cities have lost their livestock shows, they're very sensitive to the operations of it. And if Paul were here, he would talk about that. So we just sat down and listened to him and really talked through. I think what was stated was more strongly stated that it would kill the livestock show. And what we asked Paul to do was really talk about what that meant. And it boiled down to visibility for the folks that are spending tens of thousands of dollars to come in and show their animals, mobility around that area. He talked about some of the historic nature and just wanting to make sure that market stayed active. It's a really important market decision for people to come to the show, and that the look and feel of it was pretty specific for that team. That said, we have been brainstorming a number of different options, a range of things that could happen with that building, including what happens if you move it, how much would that cost, what happened, there's a ghost sign on one of the sides, so Sean's been doing some research into that what would happen, and I know that History Colorado would not support this, but as a placemaking piece around those bricks and a facade treatment, I mean, we're really kind of trying to be creative about all the options and all the costs, and then bringing that to folks to take a look at and decide what are the important things on that historic resource plan that what do we need to do. So there isn't a decision about it. We're doing a bunch of investigation on it right now.
You can ask physically what I have an idea why you do this.
It's their current maintenance and operations building, but it's only a piece of that building.
That's one issue.
The other issue that's come up is not just the livestock operations, but the other 11 months of the year where that's meant to be the movable pens and then staging and events. And so what does that do if that's the most natural place for a stage to be, but the hay barn is there? And that really begs the question both on the livestock operation side and then the event planning for the rest of the year. That said, we need to really talk about it like we did with 4701 and be creative with some of this. And then, there's no decision made at all. We're still doing our due diligence.
Betty, was it a question about this, specifically about the hay barn? Or?
It's a question about.
Yeah, okay.
That was the only building I've ever seen in the whole stock show that had the name Illyria over the top of the door. I wondered if they were able to save that, if somebody couldn't come.
Oh, yeah. What does that say?
Yeah, they were
And
not
then this, what
historic
happened to
letters.
the art gargoyles that were on top of 4,700 Alden Court? They were on the old hotel.
Well, that building is still there, so they're probably still there.
No, they're gone.
Then I couldn't tell. I can try to find out.
Are you saying there were, did you say there were gargoyles?
Gargoyles.
I'll look for some old pictures. I looked through stock show pictures, but I haven't looked through the old area things at the library. I'm looking through it. I'm digitizing photos. Maybe I'll find some.
Everybody here, Sean, or
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. Okay.
if anyone else that arrived wants to come sit at the table, it's easier to see the screen, you're welcome, but you don't have to. Yeah.
I'm good.
No pressure. Thank you.
I appreciate the placemaking, including Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville, and I appreciate all of the look at history. But in terms of history, I think what I find is missing is the real story of why there was a National Western. In other words, the whole thing about trading, the whole fact that the country at that time was talking about food. If you talk at the beginning, there's nothing about the fact that the cattle industry and bringing it here provided food for the whole country. And that kind of introduces us to the whole concept, which I think is not addressed.
Emphasized enough in here.
Huh?
That's not emphasized enough in here.
That's not emphasizing,
Okay.
which really brings us to the whole point of global. I mean, one of the initial things we talked about is global. And there was a 2 or 3 sentence global reference at the end saying we'll consider it later. But it seems to me that what we're talking about is, and have always talked about, is the National Western, really being the global center of food and agriculture and water. And I'm not sure we're really culturally talking about it here, the importance of what this can mean in terms of promoting those needs in the world. I think that needs to be part of the culture that we're talking about.
So just to recap, so as far as the stock show, really highlighting the importance of trade and food from the beginning of stock show. Obviously the site existed before that. And then as far as the global piece of the vision, the document is largely documenting existing and future, or excuse me, existing and past sort of assets and stories. But I think we could do a better job, maybe, especially as it starts to. If you remember, well, I guess it's in there, but about 2/3 of the way through, it sort of shifts to this kind of future-looking piece, and we could read more of the global component into that.
It seems like we definitely need that.
Yeah.
And I think we need something more. We talk about the West, and there is a mention somewhere about healing. And I think we need to emphasize more what's happened over the period of time to this in terms of water, in terms of air, in terms of people.
Yeah.
That we really are looking at healing this place and healing the world, and I don't really see much. And I know that's maybe future, but it's also really the past, and that culture needs to be exposed.
Yeah, we were pretty excited when we sort of turned over that stone about the healing component. And it stemmed from a larger conversation of the West originally, and then obviously very specific to these neighborhoods as well. Being mistreated, mishandled, all these different things over time. And so it really shows up in that common thread piece right now, but doesn't necessarily get emphasized in the kind of future-looking piece of the cultural plan. And we can look for opportunities to do that more. So
I think it's all part of, I guess, my vision of the National Western, of going much beyond the history of the site and even the history of the neighborhood, but the opportunity to really transform the world.
Yeah, great comments, Nikki.
whoever you saw first.
She was too close to you, Amy, so.
So to Mickey's point, I mean, I think that raises a question in my mind as to where the story is going to live. So is that going to be in the legacy building, or is there going to be a place where this story is told? Because having the cultural elements kind of on the site is cool for those people who know what they are, but where is the story going to be told so when people come to the site, they can experience that story and then they can relate to these artifacts that they see?
I think our current concept, it hasn't been decided, but our current idea, thinking on it, is that it's both. So on the site, I agree with you, if it's just the historic artifacts integrated, there's not, the story's not being told, it's rich, it's, you know, right, you can tell there's something interesting that was here, but you don't know what that was. And so we'd like to tell the story in the public realm itself. And so some of that's really explicit with interpretive signage. Some of it can be worked into even, you know, timelines and the pavement, you know, things like that. We want to keep it really creative, but telling that in the public realm. And then, yeah, I'm not sure the full program for the legacy building, but it's my understanding that some of that storytelling is being done on the ground floor of the legacy building as well.
And are you talking about, a lot of the work is distributed across the site, and are you talking about a place where someone could go and really be immersed in the entire, and really beyond, maybe beyond the legacy building and the history of the National Western and Western Stock Show Association, but this broader vision that Mickey was talking about. So someone who's completely new to this or wants to teach someone else about it, that they arrive at a place and they're able to get the panoramic historic cultural perspective.
Yes, and a place where some historical pictures, I mean, that stuff is fascinating. People love it.
I don't think we have the indoor space identified, but with the arenas, there's potential, obviously with the entries. There's the CSU facilities could play some of that role, but yeah, I think it's a great point, and we'll continue to identify that. So if it's integrated throughout, you're right, like maybe you read one piece of it, you're not getting the full story. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I know this.
I just want to make sure I understand, but so that it would be somewhere that it's publicly accessible, displayed, that you could access without buying a ticket to anything. It's the kind of thing as an idea, and I'm not saying this is a good idea. In fact, they're going to tell me it's a bad idea, but that it would be a walk around the stadium arena with a set of displays. So that you're walking through the history of the site in a place that's more accessible for someone where they're not walking 2 miles back and forth across the campus.
Yes.
Okay.
Just to follow up on Mickey's point, I think what needs to happen is the vision, the foresight needs to be ample throughout the whole complex. Similar to what they do at Disneyland. You're there to have fun. Anywhere you go on that Disneyland, you can experience, and I think the same effect needs to happen here. Where you can transcend, you can see all these cool things, you can see the art, you can see some visions, you can see some of the new things CSU is doing, some visions, some foresight. The new West.
Yeah. Thank you for your patience.
It all fits each one of the comments. Just to throw a couple things into the jigsaw puzzle there, I just want to speak to the possibility of powering up the relationship with some of these extraordinary types of things that appear in the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and the arena of dioramas and that kind of a thing. They can be created in a more accessible, interactive way. And it's also the case that the placement of the National Western Center as this whole industry is because of the indigenous people that chose this area as a smart place to set down roots in the civilization. And healing the land is an issue that I think is fundamental and precedes settlement. And I think the part of the story that is hugely critical and is part of the future too. And I think agriculture is going to have an opportunity to express the reemergence of the natural state of lands if we succeed in this arena. And so floating around over the years in our conversations has been an idea of at least some part of the public space be a recreation of the original terrain, the original natural constituents of flora, fauna, etc. And so I hope that that can become something also that feels across the sweep of the campus. And I also hope that it doesn't feel like it's I don't like showcasing, I don't like exhibits, but immersive experiences where the relationship between what was best of the past, so to speak, let's just say the preceding best into the future best. Because this insights are a continuum, and sometimes the old practices are the new solutions after we screwed up for 200 years. So I really hope that that's reflected in what's talked about culturally. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that there's still a need to weave into the neighborhoods the extension of the organic systems of eco-energy, etc. I hope when we're talking cultural, that cultural is inclusive of the fact that we are going to be demonstrating how a project of this nature, by mission, intent, vision, and obligation, improves the lives of the adjacent populations in very specific ways that have to do with economy, technology, health, and well-being. And lastly, there's one other thing. We have, as I understand it, we've got the Forney Museum, we've got the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and as I understand it, our good friend Leo, Betty, we can thank him, the Fletcher Museum, or the old ambulance factory there, I believe is going to become a police museum. I think that he wanted this. This is a neighbor that decided. There's a great mechanic there now. And I really feel there should be conversations going on with folks, and if they're not, that we can make it happen more. And I hope at some point we can see the listed catalog that you're working on, Eric, so that the creative juices can start happening on all levels among the constituency and not just behind the scenes in the art and public places formalities. So that's jigsaw puzzle stuff.
Oh, those are great comments. Thank you, Andy.
David's okay if I do John first, since we're waiting for him. Thanks.
Thank you. But I don't know what, we got a whole lot of work ahead of us here. And I think in any task, we got to separate it and look as to where we've come from, where we are now, and where we want to go in the future. And I agree mostly with the previous statements. I want to make sure the thin thread that's been wove through this area is no longer in existence. I want to turn that into a massive tug of hemp, 4 inches thick rope, and make sure that we pull all of it together. Liliana and myself, that's our obligation as members of the authority. And we need to make sure that it's reflected in the history, in the past abuses, both of humans and animals, the multi-ethnic treasure that is out here. The past, it's well documented in a lot of instances. You have the PNA, the Germans from Russia organization, the Orthodox Church, the Polish Church, Catholic churches. They're rich in documentation of people that had inhabited where they were. A museum is what we need. Maybe throughout the area, but there's the Honors Building. There's the Livestock Exchange Building. The impact that 2 world wars had on the industry, the cattle business, the wool industry, the lamb industry, the entire bunch of activity that took place here. At the cattle crossing bridge, where the railroad is now, you notice it's down. It's down about, 4 feet there? And that's on purpose it was put that way. Because if you notice just the unloading area, the concrete that's there is cubed so that the sheep and livestock that was unloaded there wouldn't, get injured. That was one of the unloading areas originally, as was along here. So there's a whole wealth of human industrial history that it's not a thin thread. It's got to be a massive tie, pulling it together from past, present, and for the next 100-year future. And that involves a lot of the human documentation that's been lost or put aside, wherever. That's our obligation as members of the authority, to make sure that that doesn't get lost and it goes forward. It's going to take money, and that's one of the obligations that we need to press for on the authority. We need to reflect the strong ethnic identity of these neighborhoods. This building, this whole area was made on the backbone of human labor, and that needs to be preserved and documented and translated into human endeavor in the future. We can't lose that. The cemetery, Riverside Cemetery, there's a wealth there of information. History, we can't let the damn train or the highway take it away from us. So the human factor needs to be interwoven, not with a thin thread, but a massive damn rope, and tie it together and pull it down so that the future generations won't make the same mistakes that were made in the past. And that's our obligation. So the wars had a lot of impact on the industries in this area. It was a money-making operation. That has to be told, especially in the time we're living today. So you got a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure it gets done. A museum has to take place in this area, a physical building, as well as the intertwinement, as Armando mentioned. Everywhere you look, there's a reference to what took place here or what took place somewhere. We've got to get at it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny we're having this conversation. Last night I was sitting with a friend and we were talking. And he talked how his dad went to join the army in World War II. And they said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a farmer. They said, no, you go home and grow things. We need this. So it's the same thing. And I mean, everything evolved around here. We had the trolley system coming this way. You know, you have all the old 1900 trains and that. You know, it wouldn't be hard to build replicas of that stuff and turn them into coffee shops. And there's nothing better than seeing history while you're in a coffee shop having coffee or a sandwich, and there's history on the tables and on the walls and pictures. I mean, that to me that's fascinating. And like Armando said, you know, you're walking through the campus and you're like, wow, what is that? It looks like an old trolley, but you go in, it's a little coffee shop, donut shop, something like that.
A whiskey bar.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, have a whiskey bar. Anyway, that's like Mick said. You know, we got to preserve the old days. And the National Western is the one that created the beef industry in Colorado, and it moved the beef industry moved from Chicago to Colorado. We were the beef capital of the United States, and I can remember my family worked in the industry. There was guys that were firemen or city workers. They quit those jobs to go work in the beef industry because the money was so much better than it was in cities and construction and everything like that. And that's what we're all about.
I think one of the things that's not clear is who is the audience. I think that the placemaking makes the audience pretty local. And I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at a worldwide audience. And we're also kind of teaching lessons that John just talked about, is what happened in the war, what happened initially in terms of bringing me here, how did the city grow, what made industry really make the city happen. Those lessons that aren't really here. It's kind of more factual, and I think we need to make sure that our audience is large and we're really telling stories that really teach them something about life.
Thank you, Mickey. Any other comments on the cultural plan? Some of the comments that have been made, sort of, it's a nice bridge actually between the cultural plan and the public space programming. So we have that little overview presentation on that too, but if there's a few more comments on the cultural plan, take those and then you guys can rest for a second while I talk.
So the only thing I'd like to say is that the conversation we just had is really important. It goes hand in hand with the enormous amount of work that's been put together on the physical elements of the site and its cultural layout and all of the artifacts. But I'm a little afraid that having that conversation about keeping track of all these stories and these lessons is just going to continue to go from week to week or just get lost. And so I don't know if there's something physically we can do to try to capture some of this information from people, because my fear is that as construction starts, it won't feel the same. We're going to start losing those stories. We're going to start losing that feel of what's the history of this place, because the focus is going to be on the new stuff, the construction. And so I don't know if there's some sort of an event that we can do or some sort of strategy we can employ to start trying to capture. Do we need professional storytellers engaged and all that? So Gretchen, obviously you have an answer.
No, I don't have an answer yet, but I've had a lot of the same conversations with our team. This is why we hired Sean. So Sean is our liaison with History Colorado. He was part of Mark's team. Now he's part of our team, and we share literally. See how he's sitting between us. But that's been part of what. John, do you have a question? Oh, that's been part of what Sean and I even talked about on the drive up here. We knew that, first of all, Eric needed help. I'm just going to lay all this out here. Eric needed help. There's one Eric, and he had a lot of different portfolios of work, including rail work, all of the placemaking, then that component of the historical. And what we realized as a team was exactly that, which is why we recruited Sean. And Mark's not mad about that anymore. I'm positive. But that's part of what I've been thinking about as you've been talking, is that what we might need to do is go back and brainstorm. There's a document, and that's going to be great, and it's going to be a document that guides us for. This is a long build out of this campus, and we're working on phases 1 and 2. And this is something that actually Kelly had thought about too. How can we start to build an exhibit that could be in one place now and be movable through construction? And then how do we find its final home? And how do we create that as movable stations right now? And so I have a note here to talk to Sean. It says, note, not a document, it's an installation, a temporary location moving somewhere permanent would be the idea that I'd like our team to pursue. And that might be something that we want to pull a group together. And once we handle the analysis on the physical structures, we talk about this as a concept. But it's a next step stemming from the document. The document's never going to be able to capture all of this. And you started with that. But that's kind of where I'm thinking. And we may just need to pull aside and figure out how to follow up on that.
Actually, follow up and strong point. We actually, Dave, when was it, 2-3 years back? There's documentation at the Denver Public Library at History Colorado where we've already started that. And it's there. They're waiting to place it in a home in this area. That's why I said we need a museum. Armando, you was involved in that, was you not? Yes. So that's actually, it was a good start, a small start, but it needs to be good. And you mentioned what, RTD? The light rail?
No.
No.
Somebody else might have.
Okay. But what did you ask me?
I asked you about the photographs.
Oh, the photographs, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, because of the light rail, that came about. But it's at the Denver Public Library. A lot of photographs, and there's the parish churches around have wealth of stuff.
Yes, they do.
So
we bring it
There's
together.
also a video.
A video, yes, exactly.
Everybody here should see that video.
Yes.
And John and I shared that at our very first authority board meeting.
Yes.
The video that came out of
And Armando, I don't know,
several of you.
did you go to the thing in Holy Rosa this past Sunday? the history. Okay, but there's a wealth of stuff out there, and we got to put it together. So we need some people to get on that out there, and the moolah's got to come to do that. I mean, hey, let's face it, we live in a capitalistic system, and I think one of the things that we've neglected, avoided, or not deliberate, but there's a wealth of history in the meat processing, the slaughterhouses, prominent families in Denver, the Stillmans, the Sigmunds, the Hellers, Dave Litvak, the people at Capitol, Friar Stillman. They have a wealth of information, and they were a big part of the economy in this area, So I'm sure they'd be tickled to death if someone asked them for their input into what we're doing here. They were hard taskmasters at sometimes, but we got around it. That's why we had a union. Nonetheless, that's history. Past history, mistakes to be avoided in the future for the future generations to come. That's our obligation, and we need to do that. And that's got to be integrated in here as the thin thread, yes. I prefer the stronger rope.
Thick hemp thread.
Thick hemp.
Good donor list, John, good donor list. To add to that, what I wanted to suggest is that you approach groups that are historic industry like Colorado Serum, Eaton, Geotech, as partners, active partners, and right of first refusal for a presence on something, because these are part of the legacy weave that, for me, is just so critical. And the solutions that Colorado Serum put out into the agricultural industry, it's a family-owned business still. And the solutions that they put out, and they're part of we have the equestrian hospital and everything for the horses, but agricultural health, agricultural technical innovation, Project Geotech is now getting into drones. There's a whole extraordinary legacy of industry that are the legacy businesses in the future too. So I'm still a little bit disappointed that the original study of agricultural economy that I think it came out of Colorado State University, and then we noticed that there weren't as many spotlights as perhaps could be on the businesses in the 80216 zip code. And so then a supplemental study, I think, was done, but it still feels academic and not activist to me. Because I feel like we need to bring the principals out, bring the families out that are still engaged. And the Colorado Serum is right there at East 47th Avenue in York with Eaton Steel, and it's right there in the heart of everything. Just as an example, Geotech is right over there on 40th and by the highly functioning A-line. So, we need to have a task force of bodies and give them the respect these legacy businesses, and those are just a few, people that really know the full list or go way beyond me. Let's activate a task force, and also, Denver Museum of Nature and Science does a lot for, temporary installations. So I appreciate the beautiful pictures, and I think the videotapes are good, and I think the interactive potential is great. I wish we could activate our founding partner, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, more richly, because they do temporary installations in that industry, and there's also potentials for leveraging additional financing, but I would love to see if there's any money in all this money we already have to put out there for this, to really anchor it.
When John was talking, we had a display up at the library, but at the same time, that's when Judy Montero, we were doing a history. And the library will come down and scan all the documents and the pictures on a day that we choose. So if we start putting this out, I talked to a lot of my old family members, old church members, and they're gung-ho to do it. I told them, start emptying out their grandparents' trunks and everything. And I never got back with him because we never had the date set. So, but people are still waiting and ready to do it. And you start spreading the word, and like you say, the old Stillman family, Lidbacks, I mean, Jim Brocco Produce, I mean, all these guys have a lot of history that was all based around here. So it's just up to us to pick up the day and put the word out what we're going to do and see if we get them all down here to copy it.
Just a question. In terms of the CSU doing something, there wasn't much discussion in the plans about CSU. They're a significant part of the culture. Are they doing their own document, or?
They have an education programming sort of effort underway, and they're rolling the culture and art piece into that. And so we actually have a meeting later this week to start sharing all the different ideas and integrate them more fully. And they also provided comment on this draft document. So I saw Gretchen, I saw you and Sean chatting over there.
We just want to talk to Dave about the call for resources, and we just wanted to.
We were just chatting that we wanted to follow through afterwards about the call for resources, because it helps if it doesn't come from the city sometimes. Helps if it's a community effort. But that's where we're really mapping out Sean's work plan for the next 2.5 years. So we've got to get a grip on the existing structures because it's a part of the construction sequencing, and then we need to give him a whole bunch of work to do. So, I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah, that was my sense. So I think I don't know when that'll be. Our next meeting is only 2 weeks out or so. So maybe it's the one after that, but I'm sure we'll report back out on sort of some of these other next steps. So there's the design component, there's integrating into the physical buildings and the public spaces, but I think there's much more to it as everyone's articulated. So the team will come back with more info there. So to keep us on pace, I'm going to jump back to the presentation. And if you have more thoughts on the cultural plan after this quick overview presentation, you can throw those out as well. But we'll shift the attention to the preliminary public space programming. This presentation was from 2 CACs ago, for the most part. So the public space programming, it identifies and organizes the public spaces, catalogs potential programming from a lot of different sources. It's not just limited to these 5 major sources, but these were the major contributors. So the master plan, the CAC, we have what we were calling inputter interviews. We probably could have come up with a better name, I apologize for those, but interviewing a lot of different people who, they program events, they host events, they put on concerts, they manage different spaces that are similar to this, open spaces, buildings, all these different pieces. There are case studies looking at other locations around the country, around the world, and then additional community input that we received during our community meetings. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at this, either at least digitally, if not print the version out. But the contents of this document, there's the documentation of different input, considerations for future task orders, the vision statement and mission statement and guiding principles are articulated again. And then the why program, and then the role of public space and the role of the authority. And then where it gets really juicy is the public realm program piece. And so it talks about different public realm space types, programming types. So things can be temporary, they can be permanent, they can be recurring. Okay. And, oh, you're going to flip that guy.
Flip the back.
Nice. And then also there can be, obviously, different audiences for different types of events and programs, as well as different scales. So it addresses all of these different programming types, what the different environmental considerations are, adaptive reuse of different elements that was integrated into that public realm program, as well as the programming itself. And then it gets into the specifics of events and activation, starting with that huge brainstorm list from the master planning effort, and then we added a lot to that through all those interviews and case studies, looking at both special events as well as daily activations. And that's something that I would remind everyone of over and over again, is we really are trying to create a 365-day-a-year destination and campus. And so while I know a lot of the conversation revolves around a handful of like really large events typically, we want to accommodate those, make those function extremely well, better than they do today, and make sure that they're successful for the next 50 to 100 years. We also want to be thinking about what is it like, and a couple people will laugh when I say this, but what is it like on a Tuesday at 10 a.m.? Right? It's not January, it's not stock show going on. What does the campus look and feel like? How do you traverse the campus? The people who are residents nearby, people who are working on the campus, who are coming here to learn, maybe it's kids in a school bus. What are they interacting with? What are those pieces that are always on the campus? What are the pieces that are really flexible and allow for different types of events? Because it will evolve over time. What the big board is, and we thought it was large, it looked like it in our office, but when we get in this big room, it doesn't look nearly as big. So this is also on the screen here. It's basically beginning to delineate these spaces. Some of it's artificial delineation, so we can talk about smaller geographies. Of course, there's not a hard barrier between what we're calling 1C and 2A, or 1 and 2. But there are adjacencies related to that. So if you start to look at the adjacent buildings, this is the entry to all the different arenas, face area 1. The adjacencies to the barn and the stockyards really focus on area 2. But then we did call those out in smaller spaces. As the design progresses and evolves, some of these may merge. There may be additional smaller spaces that are created within that. But again, for the discussion in the document, this was really helpful, and at least starting off this process. Of course, 1 second, Drew. All the rights of way are really critical open space and public space, including the bridges and the pedestrian bridge as well, and the underpass. Yeah, Drew.
So I realize this is very preliminary, but my first impression, Jay, is how do they connect so that they need to connect so that you can the pedestrian can go throughout the campus, and that's I think, like for example, from 2A to 6A. How is that gonna,
6A?
Well, yeah. Well, from the other little leg, the dog leg of 2A to 6. I mean, I think you can't have a dead end.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I mean, I just.
I think it's a great point. I appreciate you highlighting it.
And the other thing is
we are thinking about the connectivity. Just to answer the question really quickly, we are addressing the connectivity, and we're actually undergoing a study right now of the pedestrian movements on the site. And that's informing then the design, and that's creating a really great pedestrian experience, regardless of where you're trying to go. So.
I mean, the other thing too is that they're they sort of go around big areas. They're sort of peripheral, just as
like
forms.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm probably stating the obvious, but there's some things that I just wish there was. I realize you said you're going to connect them, but for example, from 8A, which is the underpass, to 7C, which is the pedestrian bridge from the train station, I wish there was just a linear element where pedestrians could go, because I come across that bridge and say I want to go to the CSU water center or something. There's only one way to go, and it's a rather, I mean, especially if you have really large crowds, it could be just absolutely packed and even dangerous, and no one would want to go there. And I think in great urban spaces, you always want, like if you look at medieval cities, the way there's many different streets, all kinds of little secret ways to go down. So rather than
linear space here,
that's what I'd love to
one
see
here as well.
Yeah,
and those would be during a really large event where there's loading and unloading. I think pedestrian access would be discouraged, but as I said, there's a lot of times when that wouldn't be the case. And even during certain events, there can be intermingling, right? That's one of the beautiful things about Stock Show today. So while it's not highlighted in the colors, we are definitely thinking about these connections.
Well, just the movement too, is I do see a lot of dead ends. And if you think about a visitor that doesn't know the site, and they're stuck up, say, in the northeast corner by 2A, and they're trying to, that's a dad and his daughter maybe, and they're trying to hook up with mom and the son, and they're down by 7B.
Yep.
You
I
know,
think,
and how, you know, you've made it kind of, there's only one path.
Yeah.
And it's...
So I think we can do a better job of conveying the actual public space in a new iteration of this drawing.
Yeah, I mean,
so yeah, like this, for instance, this obviously connects, right? And
right.
The drawing doesn't
Well,
show
you need
that,
a
so
lot
we
more
can
than that.
address that.
So that's an old version, Jay, on the screen, and the new one actually does show
I'll
the
advance it past that so no one else looks at it.
connections.
So yeah, so we have the connections here, but it still doesn't have these sort of back of house service connections, but it does have things like this.
I mean, if you're here and I want to get there.
Yep. No. There's an action.
You know, even from
The open
here to
space
here,
connection is there,
this-
so I hear you, Drew, and we'll improve the drawing to better communicate that. Yeah.
And Drew, one of the things we have to look at is the operational components of the site. We don't want to funnel people to where big trucks are turning all the time, and we're unloading animals, and all that kind of stuff. So we have to keep that in mind also. And I think when we laid out this original plan, these were really the truly public spaces. And during an event, you may not be able to make those moves that you just said because it's dangerous for pedestrians or operational-wise it would be blocked. So we're trying to look at the full public realm piece. Doesn't mean that at some point you can't make those connections, but we have to keep the operational piece in check.
Yeah, okay.
I
just think
different at all different times.
It just needs to open up.
Yeah.
It's a very closed system of circulation. It's very limited. There's one way anyway.
Yeah,
So
and I think going back to that 365-day sort of perspective, 365 days a year, I think we can, when we update this, we can show that, but then clearly articulate that there's going to be certain types of events where we really need to, for safety of perhaps animals, maybe it's the visitor, the resident who's using this to just get from the station back home. We may have to preclude access to certain areas.
Just another,
but we want to create the connections as much as possible, as many times of the day and week and year as possible.
I mean, just another thing, is everything happen at grade on the ground? I mean, because there's other ways that circulation could be at different levels, and that might help.
Yeah. So there's the catwalks currently, and there's the raised pedestrian bridge, obviously, over the rail. Right now, those are the only elevated walkways. And then we have the underpass, of course.
And then, just to interject, this isn't actually the circulation map. Oh, sorry. We'll be making a circulation map as part of Task Order 3. So this was just to show
the spaces
you go to, but this doesn't have that overlay yet. So we're thinking about it, but this diagram doesn't show that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm looking at it, and Betty Cram Drive and National Western Drive are just shown as kind of gray, which would imply that they're just roads. And of course, they're not going to be just roads. They're going to be beautiful pedestrian ways as well.
Yeah.
And so that will certainly...
Unfortunate choice of color in this.
Yeah, it was.
Would it be better if it was a gray green?
No, we can avoid gray altogether. Okay, so we can circle back to this. But within here then we talk about, as I said, the events and activation, public realm program, and there's this pretty important component where I'd say it's one of the meatiest components here, is looking at all those different spaces that's called out on the diagram, and then it looks at the programmatic functional recommendations as well as some urban design recommendations. It starts to narrow the filter and inform our work in Task Order 3, which is the conceptual design of the public realm, where I think we'll get at the pedestrian experience much more. I think you'll more clearly see the kind of front of house, back of house delineation, but that flexibility that we want to create at different times of day, different times of week, so on and so forth. And then the events programming by public space as well. So those are in 5, I can't count. 5 large categories right now. But there's a lot of nuance in there. Again, we tried to incorporate the CAC developed list from the master planning effort, and then supplemented that with additional ideas that we were hearing. So at this point, it's almost like the large wish list. And what we try to do is identify the appropriate spaces where we should at least consider it in the design in moving forward in Task Order 3, and then subsequently in future design work after the concept. is developed. So that's the big overview. So anyone who reviewed the document, or if you want to throw out comments generally on the public space programming? Sure.
Education, there should be a slash research, because that's what CSU is all about. The question, research.
Yeah. So is the big picture category?
Well,
yeah.
To me, again, CSU and hopefully all other academic institutions will join and get an MOU with Colorado State University, but it should be educational / research, where they bring new and innovative academic content, components to the table, and be able to bring their thesis, be able to debate, the new food sources in the world. And that should be along with educational / research as a forum for them to be able to bring the richness in terms of academia to the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, an oversight on our part. We are definitely thinking about we were just talking about the storytelling of kind of the cultural past of the site, but I think that future is largely about education and research, and we want to integrate that into the design of the entire site, the buildings, the public spaces, just oozing, from the entire campus.
I 100% agree with what Armando just said, and think it's a critical thing to point out, and I think it would be reflective of the master plan to go ahead and consistently say education, research, and innovation. It's called out throughout the conversations over the last years, and it makes it less academic, and it makes the bridge into industry, commerce, and the entire, I think it really needs to become more and more enriched constantly. It's in the subconscious, let's get it to the conscious. But what I wanted to say, and I apologize, I have to leave here for another meeting in a second, so this might be a little bit out of place in the discussion, but along the lines of the use of the flexible spaces, I feel like we haven't explored the possibility that's not a good word, using seasonal agricultural installations that are producing and are demonstrations of agriculture in some of these spaces. And I'm really kind of concerned about this kind of, to me it's sort of looking bland, these walls that have come recently into the landscape, live living walls. I mean, there's a whole industry that's kind of designer living walls, but there's a whole other functional way to do this that has been preceded for decades in different agricultural circles. So we could be producing in little increments all over the campus, agricultural products that could feed, for one thing, upon sales right into the community investment fund that the National Western Center can advance. We could be putting those foods into any of the food facilities on the campus with an agreement that portions of the economy it creates go into the community investment funds. And also, there's a great deal, I don't know how this fits because of people that are architects and engineers, etc., but I think topography is the place where our toes hit the earth, and I hope that we have room for something other than flat, that is, of course, mover-friendly for all types of able-bodied people. But it also, if we have some topography that has some concave and convex elements, we have more potential for rain gardens, for pollinating, things. Some of us in Globeville, I don't know, Dave and John, if you want to do this, would like to bring back the toads that kind of disappeared. There was a lot of them when I first came here, and there are people wanting to do rain gardens in their yard, partly because they were starting to see sightings. That's a way to bring in. So anyway, I hope that we are not looking at just flat transit, and I hope we're not looking at just square benches. I hope we're looking at ergonomic boulders and all kinds of things. And I realize this is all coming, this is minutia, but I just feel like the aesthetic in the conversation all the way through is really critical, along with the functional, and so I'm hoping that imbues every consideration.
Great, thank you, Eddie.
And then me.
So just another thought I had. Number 3, which is the yards, is that flexibly sometimes for public events like concerts?
I hope so,
or
yeah, that's the intent, yes.
Okay, because that really is a whole, opens up a whole possibility.
And there are many subspaces in that yards that you can size events for all different sizes.
So that's really cool. I still do, but if you think about the access to those spaces, and I know this is very preliminary, I still don't see how you get to them and get out of them. And just for safety, you don't want one way, you know.
Sure.
They're kind of bottlenecked. So
I think it's a good charge for us moving forward to better communicate the connections. It won't be in this document, but the conversations coming up, actually at our when we see you on the 27th or 28th, whatever date that is, we're going to be talking specifically about roadways and pathways and connections. So we'll make sure we emphasize that even more.
And I just wanted to add to that. So we're going to bring plan design views of some of our early drafts of what these roads start to look like so they don't look gray. But then just a reminder, because Mickey and I had talked about this, that the start of the pedestrian path doesn't start at the campus boundary. It starts with the connection back into the community. We're showing that with the bridges and the structural elements, but also with the flat elements and the paths and how you would go from here all the way through the campus and then across the other side back into community.
Yeah.
So
this is delineating campus space, but
yeah.
the mobility and circulation
Yeah,
diagram
when we do that.
is showing those larger connections.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just so you know, when we're doing that overlay, that we're carrying that through.
So I have a couple comments. One, I would hope that these public spaces are kind of laid out in such a way that people will be able to also see some of the activity going on in the buildings or in the yard. I mean, the things that are happening on site. It would be fun to integrate a little bit of whimsy in here, like maybe a horse trail somewhere that people see that unexpected, like horses coming through. You can't do it everywhere, but I mean, just stuff that really kind of gives the place the solidifies the character of the place, the historical character. The other thing is I'm going to ask you is on the programming side of it, we need to, I believe, we need to start in this document identifying who is going to be managing these spaces. And the answer is not just the authority's going to do it someday. That's not the answer, because I've seen this happen with Denver Union Station and, you know, the public spaces. There's not anyone who has been assigned to really program those spaces. And the partnership took it over because nobody else, I mean, we talked about all this stuff for years. Yeah. And that was not addressed. And we have to address it. We have to have a funding source for the management programming of those spaces, and we have to have an entity that is responsible for it. And I think it's not too soon to start saying in documents like this that is a task. That's a task, yeah.
Okay. That's a great point, Ann. Thank you.
That's really great, Ann. That's a really important thing. I just had one other thought. This is
the limit to just one.
This is it. You know, it's sort of a figure ground diagram, kind of what we call. But the buildings themselves, couldn't the enclosures be somewhat flexible, or you know, you could open them up?
Oh, sure.
And so it's not like
the public space.
Yeah,
we're going to be looking for as much permeability as possible. There's a functional component.
The livestock hall, I think, has 40 garage doors.
So open those?
Yeah.
So during a big event,
and to Ann's point, could they be glass garage doors and you can see into those spaces?
That's
what's
great.
happening? There's a lot of cool stuff.
Hey, Ann, because so many of us are listening to this, I do want to clarify, and we've talked about this a lot, the difference between Denver Union Station and this campus. And it's one that I think is hard to, and you were really involved with it, but I just want to, you know this.
And I know what you're going to say.
Yes, that DUSPA, the authority there,
they're
was a
gone.
construction entity.
Yes, I
so
know.
So they were essentially what my office is. I just want to relate the types of roles. And the authority never was created the way it is now at Denver Union Station. So we have a head start. That said, the point is still really there. I would say, though, that I think the authority is the right place to lead that, and make some of those assignments and bring in additional partners, that they'd be a great coordinating body because they're responsible for campus-wide services.
I totally
But
agree.
campus-wide public space management, I think, is the corollary to that. That should be a recommendation that gets stated in here. and
Yeah,
is in
that's my
charge.
point,
Yeah.
Gretchen, is it should be in this document.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that we're DUSPA. My office is DUSPA, and we build a thing and go away.
Right.
And the authority is 100. The authority is forever.
Right. No, I understand that difference.
Go ahead.
These look like short distances on this map. But the question is there any conveyance, I mean, can you come up with something creative, like a motor scooter to get around, and people with kids or elderly, or just people who, I don't see anything clear to that.
Yeah, again, this is delineating the different spaces, but on the mobility side, we're working with OV, so Chris Vogelsang and Beth Vogelsang, and they're looking at on-site as well as kind of bringing people from remote sites to the campus too, kind of people mover technology. Do you remember the name of the one that Beth was talking about the other day? Chariot. Chariot is, they're in discussions at DU right now about a driverless small like electric shuttle, and she was saying that this would be an amazing pilot as well, or maybe won't even pilot in that phase. But so we are trying to think creatively about different ways to move people around and not just on foot. Because you're right, these distances are very significant.
I think that that's a wonderful opportunity for a community benefits program, to some community entrepreneurship and get in that head first.
Oh yeah.
And along your lines, Ann, point well taken, and I'll make sure from the position on authority, Liliana and I, we won't let that happen.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. The other thing I want to talk about, and I know we talked about some other, I know I'm not going to do anything on it now, but the water tower, it's got to stay, it's got to be preserved as part of the history of the whole industry impact in the area.
Absolutely.
The crossing, the cattle crossing bridge, yes. I know the Corps, some people want it taken away. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be there as long as
Are you changing
but
yourself?
it's got to be converted into some purpose and meaningful use. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to make a connection for, again, some entrepreneurship, community with the center here. Obviously, the Corps is going to have something to say about the installation. I was walking down there the day before yesterday sometime, and I noticed the trestle, the railroad trestle, it's there, and it's not going to go anywhere.
The Jersey cutoff, the one just
Yeah.
north of 46?
Yeah, the Jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
No.
It went out in the '65 flood. It was rebuilt, basically on the same column, old granite structure, and it's going to last for another 100 years. The Corps ain't going to be able to move that railroad bridge, regardless of what plan they come up. That's my feeling. I don't know, but there's some strong feelings, right, Dave, about the crossing, and that's got it. The other thing is the old Armor's office building, and I know it's premature. It's going to take a lot of bucks to get that thing, and the livestock exchange building. That's a big part of history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just one thing on the Armor building, we are going to file for a Denver landmark on that, and I think it gets approved in either August, September. We'll bring the schedule for that at the next CAC meeting, so you guys can see where we're doing that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Wherever this fits. Up at Fisk Planetarium, around near Fisk Planetarium, there is a scaled walk of the solar system. You can even teach people that are blind astronomy by virtue of, imaginary in projection. This is an element that I feel could really unify the campus and extend into the neighborhoods if this could be brought in as well. And in response to, I had a lingering thought from when Mickey said, who is the audience? I think we really need to remember that part of what the challenge is everywhere in neighborhoods is for the next generations to want to stay there, to want to stay there in the neighborhoods so that we can continue the continuity of what we're really talking about. And so, even as things change and demographics, mix and remix, etc. So somehow I feel like if we can engage that now, and I think part of it has to do with how you integrate the apprenticeships along and the local hiring mandates to weave the folks that are building this into an understanding of what is to come, especially those that are possibly going to use some of these jobs to help finance additional career building and that kind of a thing. So I would just ask that the ideas of making the whole landscape, the whole atmosphere, environment, whatever you want to call it, interactive, not in a conventional sense, but in a very innovative sense around education and engagement and that kind of a thing. And I'm not sure where this fits in the conversation, but I think it needs to be out here a little bit more.
I don't, again, see much in here about CSU. I look at the programming on page 11 and the water center, the CSU center isn't even on there, the public works space. And it's not really referred to very much in this whole document. I mean, this is a critical piece. And somehow I don't think they're participating.
They are. They have done a number of meetings about the inside of their building, and they're in the they're in the process of programming their buildings right now and setting up their educational components inside. We have not seen that from them yet because it's still in progress. But as soon as we get that stuff, that can be added as an appendix. But it is a key piece of this. I certainly agree.
Their water center isn't even on here. If you look at the chart over here.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Okay. And they have a lot of interest as we start to get into more specific design concepts and engaging to look for those opportunities beyond their walls too. So that if a school bus load full of kids showed up, that they're not just limited to the their four walls, but they're using the entire campus as a demonstration opportunity. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah, thank you. So I know that at our CAC meetings, the regularly scheduled, we end up getting like 10 to 20 minutes for the placemaking study. So we've talked about doing a couple additional deep dives like this. One in likely August and one in September. And so those would be getting into the public space design, the design guidelines, all these really great, exciting pieces that I think everyone's been anticipating probably for a year plus now. So we'll get those dates out to you as quickly as possible.
Yep. Thanks, Jay.
I'd just like to go on record in appreciation of you, that there being more meetings like this, that concerted effort be made not to schedule them on city council night unless it can be absolutely confirmed that there are not public hearings, et cetera, that directly impact the Global, Leary, and Swansea neighborhoods as there are tonight. So I don't know how it can be done. This has been a chronic problem in Denver, not having a cohesive map of events. So whatever you can do in that direction, I would just request that you be really, really careful.
So I'll respond to that. This was a convergence of things, and the Fox North hearing was delayed by a week. It was supposed to be last week and it got delayed, but
in principle,
I
just want the principle
totally
to
get it.
stand.
Absolutely.
All those things are always true. It's especially important so that no conflict.
And we're looking 2
Absolutely
months out and
understand.
3 months out now, so we'll work really hard to find the best.
Yep, we will do better.
I know the effort is totally sincere, just calling it out.
And then Eric, can you remind me our timeline for comments?
This Friday, if you have any other comments. The other thing is we are going to So anyway, we would like your comments by this Friday, if you have more formal comments other than what you've had tonight. The other thing is Jay's going to give a summary of this meeting at the next CAC meeting. Okay. So if there are other things that have come up in your mind since then, feel free to bring them forward then too. That's fine. But on the other hand, we are trying to get this document done, we have to move forward. So.
Yes, yes.
All right?
I would ask for, not that you necessarily have to close off or frame, I would like a little bit more framing of what specific feedback you'd like from us. And when you share the documents ahead of time, maybe I missed it, I don't know if maybe you all included it or not, but very specific types of feedback that you're looking for that to help us understand the process moving forward. So we're helping you get the information that you need. Not that that precludes any other sort of comment outside of the questions that you're asking, but just to help frame the conversation a little bit.
I just have a quick question. Is it possible for us to get a copy of that circulation map?
It's in the document. Oh, the upcoming circulation?
Someone's making it right now as we speak. It's not done yet.
Because it would be great to have that, because it kind of, to Drew's point, it helps you understand how these spaces work.
It'll go out. It'll be included in the It'll be included in the presentation at the next CAC meeting. So it'll go out in the packet.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mickey?
I think he understands the work in progress.
This is always difficult
Yes,
to
probably.
discuss, but looking through these documents, it seems like, again, going back to the international concept, there isn't a black face, there isn't anything about an African group or something that really indicates that we are going beyond Denver, Colorado. We do have some pictures of San Antonio and all of that. But it just seems like there should be something that says we are speaking to the world.
Thank you, Mickey. And thank all of you for your extra time tonight. It really helps our team tremendously. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
I think we're adjourned.
Summer solstice. Thursday.